Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, disaster planning, crisis management, COVID, resilience, anything that's relatable to those topics, and anything that helps you, your organization, or your community plan for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If there is a topic you'd like us to about on the show, or you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free, send me an email. You can reach me through LinkedIn. That seems to be the easiest way people are finding me because I am the only Alex Fullick on there. So I'm not hard to find at all. And I do respond to everything I get. And we'll see about getting you on the show or finding someone to come on the show to talk about what you'd like us to touch on. Longtime listeners and viewers, you'll know that I was speaking at the BCI Virtual World Conference in November 2020. And I had said that I would love to get a couple of those speakers to come on the show. You may have realized by now, a lot of those presenters have come on the show, and today is no different. I am welcoming today the presenter of Wellbeing Revolution, Working Together to Build a More Resilient Workplace, Kate Field. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Now, we've got listeners and viewers literally around the globe. So could you take a minute or two and talk about yourself and what you do and how you got into what you do?
Yeah, certainly. So Kate Field, I work for BSI, British Standards Institution, but the British is a reflection of our history and not where we are now. We're a global organisation, and I'm the global head of health, safety, and wellbeing. And my role is really to develop BSI's strategy to help and support organisations around the world in prioritising their people by keeping them safe and healthy, and enhancing their wellbeing.
Well, great. I'm glad you're on the show, and congratulations for your presentation at BCI Virtual World. I know well-being, which is the key focus of what we're going to talk about today, is quite important in today's world in general. And I think that's been brought on because of COVID. There's been a greater spotlight on well-being. But how do you define well-being? What is it to you?
So I think one of the things with wellbeing, I mean, you asked sort of what my history was, and I've been working as a health and safety professional for over 20 years. And when I started, wellbeing wasn't a term that we used. There was always a focus on physical and mental health within the workplace, but we didn't really understand what that meant. And I think over particularly the last 5 years, we've seen this increased focus on wellbeing and then trying to understand exactly what it is. And there are literally hundreds of definitions around the world about well-being, and we use different phrases. So well-being is one of the most common ones, but we sometimes use wellness. In Europe, they use health promotion. And the key thing is with those definitions, they all tend to focus on the same principles, that it's about our physical and mental health, but it's also much more than that. It's about a sense of fulfillment, an expectation that we have that we can be the best that we can and want to be, and that's both from from a physical point of view, being healthy, but also creating an environment where we can flourish from a personal point of view. So this is things like career development or community engagement. So it's a really holistic term. I mean, the World Health Organization used the term for well-being, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. And I think that really reflects that, it's about the positive, and achieving something that is for the long term for us as individuals and human beings, and not simply about just not getting ill.
How does human resources get involved with that? Because wasn't that, from when I used to be a full-time person, and now I'm self-employed, but a full-time person, HR seemed to have taken a lot of that stuff. Has it grown too big for HR, or is HR not as involved?
You're leaping right into the nitty gritty, Alex.
Well, As you were talking, I was thinking of, morale, and the first thing that came to my mind was, well, HR is always, pumping, morale and all this and that. And I'm just trying to link that together, going, how have we gone
Mm,
from that,
mm,
years ago, what HR used to say, we
mm,
need morale, 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 keep it up and all this and that,
mhm,
to well-being now.
mhm. So I think as I mentioned, and this is important, there's a difference between occupational health and safety and well-being, and how they come together. And you're absolutely right. I think as organizations have started to understand the need to, you talk about morale, but increase recruitment and retention, look at employee engagement, create an environment that enhances productivity. This focus on morale and staff engagement has started to come through, and it has historically been led by HR, human resources, and they've started to implement what they call well-being initiatives, but they've tended to be what I call yogurt and yoga. It's very much a focus on physical health, as some sort of expectation that people want more than just a wage, and the solution to that is giving them the tools to live a healthier life. But I think one of the challenges that we've seen is those initiatives have only had really limited success. And the reason for that is that we need to look at this completely holistically. And one of the things that has been historically completely missed when we've been looking at this is the need to ensure that psychological health is managed as a priority within the workplace. We have seen, you mentioned COVID, I think there's much more awareness in terms of the impact of psychological health, and the positive and negative impact that can have in the workplace. We've seen that organizations who have managed to look after their workers really effectively and give them that psychological support during COVID-19 have been the organizations that have been more resilient, have been able to adapt, and come up with innovation. Those organizations that haven't really focused on their people have struggled much more because they're not helping and supporting people coming through. And this is one of the kind of the cruxes, is to understand that actually, in order to look at well-being really effectively, you need to look at it really holistically. You need to think about it from an occupational health and safety point of view. So, again, coming back to COVID, it's a really nice example because I think people really understand it. People are worried about their physical safety because of the virus, and worried about becoming ill while they're at work, being exposed to it, but they're also worried, and seeing the mental impact because maybe they're worried about job security, or there's a lot of change going on because of the new ways of working that's coming in. So the organization has to manage that occupational health and safety, but then it needs to think about what this wider holistic pieces to create this sense of fulfillment. And this is where, from a workplace point of view, you start to look at things like, what's your opportunities for career progression, learning and development, what are the relationships like within your organization, and what's at the heart of all of this is trust. And we say that word, it seems such a simple word, but actually within an organization, it's a real challenge to create trust. And it's because it's down to the culture of the organization. So the values and behaviors that particularly leadership demonstrate. And what we see with occupational health and safety in this, and thinking about it in this really holistic term in terms of well-being, is that organizations aren't focused on creating that trust environment. You have leaders who say that they prioritize health and safety and psychological health and well-being, but actually their actions don't reflect that. And that's one of the challenges
That
that
because
organize.
maybe they don't know what well-being is, because you mentioned there are so many definitions. Could it be that, because there are so many definitions, they don't really know what well-being is? So until they know what it is, we're not going to pay attention.
I think so. I think there's absolutely an element of that. Organizations have struggled to think about this in this really integrated way. It's like any part of a business, even business continuity. Organizations tend to think about each of those elements separately. So you might have business or continuity, and you might have finance, and then you'll have the operational bit of the business, and then you'll have HR, and then you'll have health and safety. Um, but what's the connecting element of all of those things? It's people. So until organizations really start to think about people
Hmm.
throughout of that and prioritizing them through each of those elements, you're going to have limited success. And I think, yes, there's an element that organizations and leaders aren't thinking like that. They're still thinking about, dare I say it, the bottom line, and that's where their focus is. So it's about shifting that focus, and we're starting to see that come through. We're seeing a move from shareholder capitalism, which is very much about the bottom line, to shareholder capitalism, which is starting to think about people. And we're seeing that push through things like ESG benchmarking, more shareholders
What ESG benchmarking?
benchmarking. So environmental, social and governance. So one of the things that we've seen is that as human beings, particularly things like the wider sustainability agenda, we want to do the right thing, and we want to create an environment for organizations to do the right thing. Again, this is part of the wider trust environment. Organizations want to do the right thing. They want to reassure their own people, their own workers, but also their customers and their shareholders. And one of the ways that they can do that is showing that they are demonstrating best practice in things like governance, social obligations. So this is what we might have historically have termed corporate sustainability or corporate responsibility, and of course environmental issues. So this is about trust in its widest sense, but they are all interrelated, because you won't create that environment within an organization unless you're creating that trust for the people who are delivering those obligations, if you like.
It seems to me well-being isn't really a standalone item. Hey, we're a committee and we're going to talk about well-being.
Mhm.
It's it includes everything within the organization, from the top, executives, right to
Mhm.
the newest person who walks in the door. And I'm assuming that regardless of hierarchy within the organization or their role and responsibility, well-being has to apply exactly the same to everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things we've seen for COVID is as a number of us do more of this working from our homes. I think what we've seen is an improvement in trust and a breaking down of barriers. I think historically, within a work context, we're not seen as human beings. We're seen as part of the corporate machine,
Yeah.
one of the commodities that the organization has to deliver its services, its processes to make a profit. But we are all humans, and we have seen our children come in, our dogs come in, our bosses, amazing collection of t-shirts that they might have had from their youth, and it's really broken down those barriers. And yes, it does apply, because we're all human beings, and we all have this desire to be the best that we can. I mean, this is not something new. Maslow talked about this in his hierarchy of needs back in 1954, I think it was. That we want, once our basic sort of needs are taken care of, we're kept safe and we've got food on the table, then we want the ability to have this self-actualization, to as I've said, to be the best that we can. And in order to do that, we need to create an environment in our life that allows us to do that. And if we think about work is the most of our life.
Hmm.
We are working, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And therefore, to create that sense of fulfillment and to create that expectation for us to be the best that we can, workplaces need to think about it and approach it in this way. So, simply paying a wage, which is what we used to get, is just not enough. We want to feel that we enjoy our job. There is an emotional connection. We want to feel that we get on and are supported by the people around us. We want to feel that actually we've got this opportunity to develop, or that our skills are being used in the best way that they can be. So it is this much more holistic thing, and yes, it's about everybody doing that. And of course, within the context of that, it's ensuring, I mean, you mentioned that sort of that it should be for everyone, and actually this sort of fairness is really important within this context. And this is where it starts to then bring in sort of broader issues in terms of diversity and inclusion, because if there's any real or perceived unfairness within the workplace, inequality, then actually that will undermine the trust that is being created. So yes, it is about thinking about it in this widest possible terms.
It's interesting you mentioned the piece earlier about employees, being used really to kind of prop up the bottom line, make money for people. Because I've always thought that people aren't an asset of an organization; they're an asset to the organization. They're there to help you, not for you to use them. And I guess that's part right now with well-being, is to flip that, to recognize that these are people, and I can't just use them as a cog in a machine, so that a shareholder makes more money, or I get paid an extra bonus.
Yeah, I mean, there are very good studies that show that investing in your people is going to have positive returns. And well-being is an element of that. The return on investment is well demonstrated now. But I think one of the things that organisations sometimes struggle with is considering how to find a balance between kind of this personal sense of fulfillment and kind of this work sense of fulfillment. And sometimes we talk about what is termed as the psychological contract. So this is almost the unwritten expectations between a worker and the employer, the business. So a worker will have this sense of what they want out of work, and as I've said, it's much more than just a paycheck. And the employer will have a sense about what they want out of the worker. And you're right, historically, I think it's been that they're just seen as an asset, a cog to do X, Y, and Z in terms of work, and forget that actually, a cog is part of a wider system, and a cog will only carry on working if you maintain it and you look after it and you oil it. And I think organisations have really struggled to see that, but we're starting to see a shift change, and COVID has certainly helped, but we're still, I think, a long way on, in terms of that journey. If we look at, research for organisations that introduce wellbeing, they tend to go through a similar journey. So, and you mentioned sort of it often starts with HR. So normally it's something like an employee survey, engagement survey that is done, because again, coming back to morale and engagement. So they do an employee survey. It usually comes up pretty badly. Unsurprisingly, because they haven't been looking after their people. So you ask them how they're feeling and they go, oh, well, it's not great. You can do better. So then organisations will, as I say, start to introduce some basic what is called well-being, but is what is generally more wellness initiatives. So that I mentioned the yogurt and yoga,
Yeah,
so
I
they're
like that. I like that.
yeah. I mean, or Fruity Fridays is the other one, or giving everybody a Fitbit to encourage them to walk. It tends to focus very much on personal physical health, and that has some limited success. And usually, as part of that engagement survey, you might start to see some issues started to be highlighted around psychological health and mental ill health and occupational stress. And that might actually, or that might have what has triggered the survey is sometimes there's increased absence from things like burnout or anxiety or depression or stress, and that can often be a trigger. So you have these kind of often high levels of sort of psychological illness within the workplace created by work, and you introduce these wellness initiatives, and what you get is that you get kind of an improvement in engagement, because people like the idea of being looked after a little bit more, but it doesn't really do anything to help with that psychological impact. So then sort of there's a lot of head scratching, and you mentioned, well, why isn't it working? We've given everybody yogurt, and yoga. Surely they should all be happy now. Why aren't they? So then they start to dig a little bit deeper, and think, oh, well, actually, maybe we need a policy about flexible working, because actually people have complained that we're not offering flexible working enough. Oh, I know, this is a classic. We'll give them some resilience training. Yes,
Oh,
and not
yeah.
resilience in terms of business continuity. No, 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 no. We will give them resilience training to improve their mental health, to make them more resilient. And again, it's a misunderstanding. It's sometimes seen as an inoculation against stress or burnout, rather than dealing with the underlying issues. And this is the key journey. So you get organizations, they kind of start here and they introduce a bit more, but it doesn't really make a difference. And the reason for that is because they're not thinking about these wider issues, and they're not thinking about joining psychological health and safety and physical health and safety with all of these well-being initiatives, which is why you always get this kind of plateau and this, well, but we're doing all this great stuff, why is it not making a difference? And that's the key thing, is helping organizations understand that it's a really holistic approach that's needed.
I couldn't help but think it's, you're identifying these problems, but you're fixing it with band-aids.
that's that's absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better myself. That is exactly what happens. Yeah, we've got an issue with mental health. We'll stick a plaster on it rather than understand, actually what's caused it in the first place. And until organizations do that, then you're only ever going to have limited success.
Mhm. I'm wondering what's driving this well-being change, especially with regards to people, because for many years, organizations kept saying, "Oh, people first, people first."
Mm.
So I'm wondering what's changed to really bring well-being to the forefront now, or was there an event or anything specific that's changed? Because I can't help but think, well, maybe organizations were just lip service, for 10 years ago, when we're really only experiencing a well-being change now.
Mm, mm.
So what's driving this change?
So it's quite a complex picture, and I think it's just kind of a almost a perfect moment in time. So what we've had go on is we've had, from a public health point of view, a much greater understanding of the impact that particularly poor physical but also growing mental health has on people, and the impact that has on the public health system. So, we've seen and we hear the reports about increasing obesity and the knock-on impacts that has in terms of diabetes or cardiovascular disease. And obviously, as more people become ill, they want to access and need access to public health. And public health is struggling to keep up with this demand. So what we've seen is sort of then governments going, right, highlight, well, this is a real issue for us. This is creating a burden on our health services, but also we're seeing that, for some of these conditions, actually it's having an impact on productivity of a nation because people aren't able to work because they're ill. So we've got this governmental level response starting to come in and realize that actually we need to tackle these, they're quite often called comorbidity health issues, to actually start to manage the burden on public health, but also to help and support organisations in terms of keeping people in work. And as part of that, we also understand that although, and I obviously, my profession is about occupational health and safety and well-being within the workplace. We know that although, if you don't get it right, you can physically harm or mentally harm people within the workplace. Actually, by and large, the best thing that you can do for people from a physical and mental point of view is enable them to work. And of course, then there's a knock-on impact that has for society. So if you are working, you have a wage, which means that you have better access to education, which means that there is better outcomes for your children. You are then supporting a wider community because you've got maybe some disposable income to go and buy things, or go on holiday if you're lucky. So there's a much greater awareness of this web that is created about people. Again, it all comes back to people. So governments are driving this agenda, and as part of that, they are starting to ask organisations to step up and take greater responsibility as part of this agenda. And I mentioned already that we spend most of our life working. And therefore the workplace has to step up and take responsibility. So you've got kind of that aspect coming through. We've also got some real big generational issues that is also driving this. So we've got an aging population. And there's again real concern from a governmental point of view that we've got a large proportion of people who are going to retire, but are still going to need support from a social point of view. So actually, if we can keep those people healthy and in work longer, then again, that is going to be better for the individuals and society. At the other end, we've got generation X, Y, and Z coming through, and they have a very different expectation about work. They expect work to create an environment that looks after them from a physical and mental point of view, that enables them to have opportunities for career development in a way that older generations never did. Older generations they went to work, they got a wage, and that was it. There wasn't necessarily the same expectation. So you've kind of got this perfect storm, and then sort of almost a global layer on top of that. And I mentioned environmental, social and governance, ESG, but that's been driven by sort of corporate responsibility, and that's been driven by the global approach to the Sustainable Development Goals and what came before it, the UN Global Compact. So actually this desire for us as human beings to be doing the right thing for people and the planet. And if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's one that is focused on decent work. So again, making sure that people are kept safe and healthy in the workplace. We've got one that is focused on good health and well-being, looking at these broader social impacts. So there was one other point I wanted to make on this. We've also got, I think, a much stronger drive and recognition about diversity and inclusion. Again, people and fairness. So we've got, as I say, almost this perfect storm of all of these different elements that have been bubbling around, and there's been pockets of them before, actually starting to create a momentum for change. And that was starting to happen. And then we've had, Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 that have come kind of given an extra push, if you like, to help push organisations in the right direction.
Is there does well-being contribute to this organizational resilience aspect? I think you touched on that in your presentation for the BCI virtual world. Can you talk about that, what that link is, and a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. So so organizational resilience, I mean, there's a definition which I'd like to use because it will help me explain it, if I may. So from British Standard 65000. So for those of you who want the number, guidance on organizational resilience. And that actually defines organizational resilience as the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruption in order to survive and prosper. So why is that important? Well, it talks about the ability of an organization to anticipate and prepare. So you need an organization and the people within that organization to be able to horizon scan and look at what's coming and be able to then respond and adapt to that. And again, this comes back to people. And if we look at the elements that make up organizational resilience, you need people and the culture led by leadership to create that environment. And that's making sure that people have the right competencies. And this is not just the competencies to do the job, but the competencies to understand the impact that that might be having. You need innovation in order to have resilience, because one of the things that's interesting about organizational resilience is that it's termed attention quadrant. And I have to say, I really like it. So you have this quadrant and you've got progressive, kind of in terms of thinking innovatively and being able to think sort of outside the box. Then you kind of got defensive. So that's kind of thinking about, right, how do I protect what I've got and maintain almost the status quo. We've got consistency in terms of approach. So there's an element of kind of overlap with these. And then you've got flexibility. And organizational resilience is a constant moving between these different dynamics. And what you see is organizations that are able to create that flexibility across those quadrants are able to are more resilient, because sometimes you need to batten down the hatches and be quite defensive, but sometimes you need to be really innovative. And again, we've seen that perfectly with COVID-19. Some organizations and sectors, like things like the aerospace sector, have been really hit in terms of the impact that COVID has had. But some of those organizations have responded really innovatively and have started manufacturing things like ventilators. And you only create that ability to create this sort of flexibility within the organization to manage these different elements if you've got the right people who are enabled and have the right competencies and the right behaviors to create that resilience. So, it is absolutely, the two are related. An organization doesn't exist really without its people. So creating an environment that is enabling those people to be the best that they can will also make them more resilient.
And the organization itself, because you'll to use what you said, innovative. So I'm assuming that would create new products, like you said, with ventilators in the aerospace industry,
Mm-hmm.
and new services. And I'm assuming create a better client experience, which many leaders always want for their clients. How does this relate to client experience? Does it improve? And I'm assuming that all of that is going to be related, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are sort of different studies that come through, but we see that for instance, organizations that don't look after their people are the ones who aren't as resilient in the longer term because they haven't created this environment. And those organizations that are struggling, you tend to see issues in terms of customer complaints, quality output issues, poor productivity. They might have other issues in terms of retaining and recruiting talent. So you do see this knock-on negative impact when you don't get the balance right. And I mentioned innovation and how important it is in resilience. You need to create innovation. And one of the things that, we have now seen, coming back to this, why is it all happening now, is we understand much more that actually to create a really innovative organization, you need a really diverse workforce in order to create innovation. If you've got a very homogenous group, it's, to be honest, it's never going to be innovative because it doesn't have any ability to think outside the box that it's used to. So in order to create innovation, you need diversity and inclusion, and that's part of the wider well-being. So hopefully that's starting to make sense about how all of these things are interconnected, and they absolutely are.
Now, how does business continuity and business continuity management professionals contribute to this?
Okay,
How
so
do they either get involved or how does the profession fit into this, or how does well-being fit into BCM?
Okay, so it's really important, and I touched right at the beginning that one of the challenges that organisations have is kind of almost all of these functions working separately, and actually you're all dealing with people, so you need to come together and work kind of cross-functionally. And I know that's not always easy, but that's the key thing. But if we think about business continuity, resilience professionals, they're risk professionals. I, as an occupational health and safety professional, am a risk professional. We deal in risk. That's what we do. And risk is about solution finding. I think sometimes, it's misconstrued as being very defensive and about stopping organizations, but actually it's a really innovative enablement tool for organizations. So I think you've got that overarching piece, but I think the other thing that is worth considering for business continuity professionals is that you're looking to think about disruption and change that comes with disruption. And we know from research that actually one of the things that is most likely to unsettle people is disruption and change. We again perfectly seen it at the moment with COVID-19. So from a business continuity professional point of view, when you're thinking about your plans, thinking about the impact that disruption or change will have on the workforce will be really important to mitigating the impacts of that. And the more effective that you are at doing that, the quicker you're going to have that bounce back that in terms of after managing with the disruption. So I think that's a key area to think about. And I think, thinking about COVID-19, one of the things that I've had many discussions on is, a lot of organizations didn't have pandemic response in their BCM reports. Well, actually, possibly if you'd spoken to your health and safety professional team, they might have identified it because communicable disease is a known risk. The scale of this pandemic and the impact is unprecedented in modern times, but we've had previous pandemics. We've had SARS, we've had MERS, we've had pig flu. It is out there. So I think sometimes there's expertise and knowledge within your organization that can help and support. Likewise, the other way I would just like to sort of mention is that we see that health and safety professionals sometimes particularly struggle with understanding disruption and emergency planning. So your business continuity professionals can help and support with that, and again, all of that then comes back to actually looking after your people.
It's interesting, all these different groups that you mentioned, that tend to work in silo, they've got to work together, because I remember the days business continuity, when it came to putting anything in place regarding people, was we'll send people home, and that's as far as it went. We'll give them a laptop, or if they needed a
Mm,
printer or whatever. That's it. That our part stops at that. But now it's we have to work with other teams to take that further. They're at home now. What does that mean when they're home?
yeah,
And what's the impact going to be?
yeah.
Because the impact isn't just you can't sit at your little fancy cubicle with
Mm.
your stickers on their wall or whatever. Now you're at home with so many different things. There's a different impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that awareness that, that action to the disruption will have a potential psychological impact. So you've solved maybe the immediate problem in terms of keeping people working, but yes, you're absolutely right. It will create additional challenges, and I think that's one of the things we sometimes see missed in business continuity is it's focused on sort of almost black and white solutions, and not thinking about sort of the grey and the human and the emotional impact that has. And one of the things we see for bigger disruptions, so maybe after a very serious incident on a site where maybe there's people have sadly lost their lives, is actually that can have immediate psychological but also long-term psychological impact. And as business continuity, the organization needs to ensure that they've got that immediate support but also that long-term support. And again, we're seeing that with COVID-19. There's a need to support individuals now while they're going through and experiencing it, but we also know from previous pandemics that actually there'll be medium and long-term implications. People will suffer with things like post-traumatic stress disorder, and that can be months or even years. So an organization needs to consider the impact of disruption, not in that immediate term, but actually the lasting implications.
Yeah, the long term part of it, not just the response and recovery,
Mm,
so that you're up and running again, but the long term recovery of your people,
mm,
and the mindsets,
yeah.
not
And
just the physical activity, productive activity side of it.
yeah, and I think that the other thing that's often under, misunderstood is that you know planning for disruption, and going through those scenarios, that practice piece is really important. And one of the things that we've seen, and we see this particularly in things like the emergency services, where they practice these scenarios, is they are then more resilient when they are actually exposed to it. So I
Mhm.
think, again, coming back to your point about what business continuity professionals can do, is making sure that when you're identifying those different scenarios, that you are regularly practicing in full the scenarios and your reaction to those. Because if people know what to expect, and plan for it, they will be more resilient, and again the long-term impact will be reduced. So I think that's a really important part for BCM professionals to consider, is again, because it tends to get, we rely on desktop exercises,
Mhm.
and that isn't enough. So the more that we can practice those scenarios, the better that will be as well.
And that's when you start reaching it, when you get to those pieces of a scenario or of a test, you start, I'm guessing, talking with HR people or health and safety people, or finance or whatever, and say, what does this mean long term for you, or what could it mean long term, and what do we have in place, right? Or what
Yeah.
could we put in place to address these?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's so important to be creating those cross-functional teams. And actually, I'd say that the earlier that you bring those teams together, the better that is. It's like all
Mm,
things, they have really important perspectives, and if you can, it's much easier to incorporate it at the beginning than to
yeah.
try and wedge it in at some point later, when it's never going to be as effective. So the sooner you can create those cross-functional teams and get that input, the better that will be for the organisation and the people.
Believe it or not, we've only got 2 minutes left. Could you take a final thought, a minute, and give us a final thought on well-being revolution?
Yeah, thank you. So I can't believe the time's gone so quickly already. So I think, the key thing for organizations is to understand that, well-being isn't just a single thing. It's absolutely about prioritizing people and considering that in a really holistic way. So yes, that incorporates what we might think of traditional health and safety. So making sure that people go home free from injury and ill health, but we are also creating an environment that is not harming them from a psychological point of view, that we are addressing things like bullying and harassment, but we are also creating an environment that enables individuals to flourish, that they have career development and autonomy and flexibility, that we are creating an environment that actually enhances the culture of trust within an organization, that enhances diversity and inclusion, that creates a fair and respectful workplace, and also gives opportunities for individuals to think about their, maybe giving back to the wider society, which we haven't really touched on. So prioritize people and think about it in this really holistic way, and bring your cross-functional teams together, because until you do that, you will only ever have limited success.
And on that note, thank you very much, Kate, for sharing your expertise and time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and the time has flown past.
It does. It does. And I know, we hardly even really looked at our agenda. We just let things go. I told you at the beginning that's what would happen.
Well, if we get questions and further comments, then I'm more than happy to be invited back and discuss those in more detail.
Oh, be careful what you ask for. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on the topic, Wellbeing Revolution, working together to build a more resilient workplace, from the BCI Virtual World Conference. I enjoyed having you here today and chatting with you. And everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.